This is the Recap Episode, a weekly podcast about exploring and analyzing the stories told by reality TV season by season. I'm your host, Walker, social scientist and reality TV superfan. For each episode of the podcast, I watch a whole season of a show, then recap the main events, analyze what we get to watch, and discuss what that season and the show have to say about the people in the show and how it influences you as a viewer. For Pride Month, I'm watching and covering shows that focus on the queer community, and this week I have Strut, a 2016 docuseries that follows models at Slay Model Management, the first trans-focused modeling agency. Before I get fully into that, if you like what you hear in this episode, then consider giving the show a follow on your preferred podcasting platform, rate and review the show, and follow the pod on social media on Instagram and TikTok at The Recap Episode. Speaking of social media, over on those accounts during Pride Month, I am doing 30 days of spotlighting and highlighting queer and LGBTQ plus focused reality TV shows, doing a little bit of media queer history. The show that I'm talking about today was actually originally just going to be part of that series where I only do like a minute and a half overview of the show. But when I looked at this one and I found that I could watch it pretty easily and it wasn't too long, I said, let's just watch it instead and do it as part of the pod. So here we are. So, Strut comes right at the 2015-2016 burst of transgender representation in U.S. media. Caitlyn Jenner came out in April 2015, and then her show I Am Kate came out later that same year at the end of July. Oxygen, the channel where Strut aired, started showing the Prancing Elites project in April 2015 as well, which focused on a black, gay, gender non-conforming dance team in Alabama. I Am Jazz on TLC premiered in 2015, and Becoming Us on Lifetime premiered in June 2015 as well. Elliot Page's Gaycation documentary series would come out in April 2016, and then this show came out in September 2016. And that's just the unscripted shows that focused on queer and transgender people. There were many trans individuals who made appearances in various shows, both unscripted and scripted. It was an interesting time for transgender media to suddenly explode outward. And it's kind of sad to think about, like, reflecting back on 10 years later. Now, normally I like to give a little bit of context about where the show came from, who created it, how it was produced, anything interesting that might flavor this discussion. However, I couldn't really find a lot about the creation of this show and where the concept came from, just that Whoopi Goldberg served as the executive producer. She did, however, provide a quote that does a pretty good job at summarizing the concept for the show and why we should be interested in following these people that I'd like to share. So Whoopi is quoted as saying, "The models in the show are struggling with things we can all relate to. Trying to make ends meet, fighting to make a name for themselves, and navigating the minefields of personal relationships. All of these struggles are amplified by the fact that they are also fighting to break down barriers and taking on the responsibility of representing the transgender community in today's society. It's time to separate caricature from real people, and that's what we are doing with Strut." In the previous episode for the podcast, when I covered the show My Transsexual Summer, I talked about how that show came from a call from trans advocacy in the UK for better, more positive transgender representation in the media, and thus that show was made. This show, from Whoopi's quote here, is kind of saying a very similar thing. We want better representation, and we want more representation that is outside of just stereotypes, caricature, and also transness for the sake of just having transness. So what this show is aiming for overall is authenticity, realism, representation of the transgender experience, while they're also models. Before going a little further, I do want to point out really quick that Strut was the 2018 winner of the GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding Reality Program. It beat out Gaycation with Elliot Page, I Am Kate, I Am Jazz, and the Prancing Elites project. And I'll also say, you can watch this one. I watched it on Amazon Prime. I think I bought the whole season for like $10. Not too bad. 6 episodes, so it is kind of short. So if you're kind of like a cost, is it worth it kind of person, maybe listen to the rest of this episode and then decide if you want to go watch it yourself. But I thought it was a pretty good watch. I'll circle back to kind of a better review towards the end. So, Strut is a docuseries, meaning we get most of our show footage and content from camera crews following the cast members around fly-on-the-wall style. This footage is supplemented with confessional interviews that are filmed on a later date. Interestingly, for this show, the confessional footage always has the cast members in what is very clearly a studio. That's not uncommon. Reality shows do that all the time. It's like one of those big school picture day, like painting-esque backdrops, and they either sit on like a bench or a big armchair. The cast members are always done up in like a very fashionable look for their confessional interviews. Makes sense. They're models. Let's put them in kind of a couture get-up of some kind. What is interesting to me, again, 6 episodes, it seems like the first 3 episodes interviews were all shot on the same day, and then the last 3 episodes interviews were all shot on their own day, at least based on the outfits. What I mean here is that the cast members are in the same confessional outfits for 3 episodes, consecutive episodes each, indicating to me that they either had the cast wear the same fits and put them in the same makeup 3 different times, or they just had them discuss 3 episodes at once and only did the interviews twice. Why is this important to talk about? When we have these reality TV confessional style interviews, they're often reacting and kind of remembering and being put back in the moment of what they were filmed doing and what the producers are kind of putting together for the storylines for the episodes, and then having them comment on that. So while in the show, it's edited to be a very in-the-moment explanation of what we're watching from the fly-on-the-wall footage, these interviews are actually being filmed and recorded later. And so the cast members do have some time to kind of sit with it and have time to kind of think about the events that it transpired and they participated in or what occurred. So Strut had 6 episodes that again aired on Oxygen starting in September of 2016. As with many docuseries, each episode tends to jump between stories and cast members, which helps to break up the episode and maintain engagement, but also to convey a sense of time passing. Unfortunately, that does make it a little difficult to recap the events in a linear fashion, because then I would be saying, this person did this, and then this person did this, and then this third person did this, and then we circled back to person A, who's doing this now, and now person A has joined up with person D, who's doing this, and now we're back with the second person. It's kind of confusing, it's a little messy. So instead, I'm going to cover a bit of the first episode. I'll cover the main events, because there are a lot of things that occur in which multiple cast members participate in, and it's harder to just like cover those separately. It'd be a little bit messy. And then I'll cover each of the cast members' kind of story, overarching plot, what we learned about them and what we learned from them, and then circle back around to talking about the show as a whole. Like I said at the top, in this show, we follow some of the models at Slay Model Management, a modeling management company that focuses on working with and supporting transgender models. We're going to follow 5 models who make up our main cast. The names are Aris, Ren, Laith, Isis King, yes, that Isis King from America's Next Top Model Season 10 as the extra who did better than the model in the homelessness photo shoot, Season 11 as a contestant, and then Season 17 as an All-Stars contestant. And our 5th cast member is Dominique Jackson. Yes, that Dominique Jackson, model and actress who after the show would appear in Ryan Murphy's Pose, and also go on to do many other projects, including the show Legendary. We also have a few reoccurring supporting cast members, notably the founder of Slay Model Management, Cecilio Asuncion, and his main assistant, Cassandra Cass, who had previously starred in the movie Trantasia and the reality series Wild Things, which I actually highlighted on the first day of my little Pride Month series over on the socials. Some reoccurring friends of the models also appear regularly, and we also get some of the other models at Slay that show up from time to time who are friends with our main 5. We primarily follow the models as they deal with the ins and outs of the modeling world through the lens of being transgender, which includes doing auditions, going to go-sees, participating in photo shoots and modeling gigs, and trying to make it in this industry. We also follow part of each of their personal lives, mostly in relation to their families or dating. The show takes place in both LA and New York City. Slay Model Management is located in LA, and Ren, Aris, and Isis live in LA during the show. Laith lives in New York City, and Dominique spends substantive time in both locations during the show, although she and her husband live in New York City. Now, each episode again really jumps around a lot. If I consider each switch to a different cast member within an episode a separate scene, 3 of the episodes have 17 different scenes in them, and the fewest an episode has is only 12. It'd be a little confusing to cover each of these scenes in order because the narrative would be jumping all over the place. However, our 5 cast members also often have stories intertwined with each other, so I want to cover the main events of the stories of the show and then we'll dive into each cast member a little bit further. Now, episode 1, of course, is our expository introductory episode, so it's going to take a little bit longer to cover through because we got to kind of get everyone presented and talked about. So, we open in LA with Ren as she wakes up late in her apartment in a very oddly cinematic shot for a reality TV show, in my opinion, that follows along her body as she stirs in her bed and some of the producer credits play. The show got, again, real cinematic with it in a way that doesn't feel like reality TV. It made me instead feel like I was watching a drama series. But it is an unscripted show, as far as I can tell. It's some of these editing decisions were a little strange, and I'm curious again to how they filmed something like this. If it's supposed to be an unscripted show, this and other scenes kind of had that vibe. Anyway, Cassandra is there to pick her up and take her to work, and she gives Ren a bit of a hard time on the drive over, remarking that Ren should put some effort into being more model-like and more professional, be on time, take care of yourself, make yourself more presentable, etc. I'll swing back around to Ren after talking about Arise, because Ren's story in this first episode is wrapped up with Arise's, as they audition for the same Go-See and have a scene together in a salon later on. We next jump to New York City to be introduced to Laith, who is from Harlem. He shares that he has been transitioning for 2 years, and he thinks of his trans identity as being very secondary. This is a common thing we're going to see with some of the cast members in the show, and makes for a very interesting dichotomy for the other cast members who are very upfront with their transness in contrast. Laith has a fairly independent story this episode. He has a photo shoot lined up that he's nervous for because he doesn't think he's physically ready yet. It's a magazine cover swimsuit shoot, and he's anxious about his skin and his physique and having to go shirtless and all that. But Cece pokes at this a little bit, and it seems he's more anxious about making the step in his modeling career to doing shoots with minimal clothing. Cece gets Dominique to go talk to him, as she's kind of a mentor to him, and the others really, and she hypes him up, and we watch as he rocks this first photo shoot for the series. Laith has another very important expository scene in this episode. We watch an interaction Laith has with his mom, because he still lives at home with her, during which they talk about Laith's identity and his mom's unwillingness to use the correct pronouns or call Laith her son. Laith's mom is Pentecostal, and she has a lot of religious conflict with Laith being transgender that is making it difficult to accept him. It's a very rough scene, but it's important to establishing Laith's character and his current position in life and where he's at and what he's dealing with, because his mom is adamant about not even wanting to try to use the right language and accept Laith. This is what kind of gives him some motivation and some internal struggle and familial conflict that we get to watch throughout the show. Since I mentioned her, I'll talk about Dominique next. When we're introduced to her, she talks about how in her modeling experience, she's always kept her trans identity a secret in order to prevent discrimination as much as possible. Which, keep in mind, she's also black and an immigrant, so there's already other layers to discrimination she faces in whichever industry she's working in. Dominique also shares with us that she's been with her husband, Al, for 18 years, and she loves him and her marriage immensely. This is going to be a big focus of Dominique's story for the show. The marriage versus the career. Most of Dominique's time in this first episode is spent with Laith, helping boost his confidence for his photo shoot, and reassuring him that if modeling is what will help him flourish, then he needs to chase that. Outside of that, we kind of just get the exposition to her and her marriage and her time in the industry. Arise is first introduced at a Go-See, which if you're not really a reality TV freak and haven't watched all of America's Next Top Model, a Go-See is a sort of interview and an audition with a magazine brand designer or some company that wants to use a model for something. The models will typically show off their portfolio of completed work, try on some outfits, and show off how they can sell the look and demonstrate other relevant skills. Arise is a very experienced model, so of course she rocks the Go-See while she educates us a bit about the competition for jobs in the modeling world. Part of Arise's story in this first episode and a little bit of the second is about her nose. Cece wants her to consider getting rhinoplasty, as it may open up for opportunities, but Arise is firm in her conviction to not change her appearance, especially in a way that caters specifically to white hegemonic ideas of physical attractiveness at the expense of natural black bodies. I said I'd circle back to Ren. It turns out that Ren is at the same Go-See that Arise is at, and she comes off as way more amateur than Arise, but then the designers do agree that Ren has talent, and she just needs some experience and refinement. Ultimately, Ren actually lands this job over Aris, which starts a little bit of a Ren versus Aris thing going forward. Cassandra and Aris both think that Ren really does need to step things up to be a successful model and not just stay comfortable where things are easy. Not getting the job and talking with Cece about the circumstances does make Aris consider at least talking to a plastic surgeon about a possible nose job. Lastly, we have Isis. In this first episode, she's explaining to us that she just recently moved out to LA to work with Slay, and she does of course bring up the ANTM background. We join her at a meeting with Cece to talk about the opportunities that Slay can bring her, and she talks a bit with him about specifically not wanting jobs just because it's a trans-focused job. She wants her talent and work to be able to stand on its own and speak for herself outside of diversity-focused campaigns. To Isis, Slay needs to prove its usefulness to her just as much as she needs to prove she's a valuable member of the Slay group. This doesn't exactly go very well in this first episode, as during a model mixer that Slay holds, where all the new models can kind of meet each other, Cassandra ends up in a fight with another model, Claudia. This results in yelling, drinks being thrown, all good reality TV hijinks. But this is far too much unprofessionalism for Isis, who takes this as a sign to leave the event and start to reconsider her big life change to come out to LA just for all that. And that's episode 1. And as you can start to tell, this show wants to say things about both the modeling world and the lives of transgender people, and kind of integrate these two together to also maybe say something about what it's like to be transgender and a model, and both of those things at the same time. Episode 2 begins some of the plot focus on relationships. In particular, Laith goes on an awkward date with someone his friend Giselle knows, and Cece asks Dominique to move to LA to be a modeling coach for Slay, which would take her away from her husband and put a new stress on their relationship. Laith's date goes as one may expect, given that the blind date that is set up for him, that person was not informed ahead of time that Laith is transgender, so we unfortunately get to watch and observe all of the awkward cis person asking invasive questions they shouldn't be asking of a transgender person in a blind date setting, which is partially used, I guess, for, like, educational effect, but it's also one of those things where it's like, did we really need that? I'm not sure if we needed that to be in here. For Dominique, the struggle here is that Al, her husband, really just doesn't want her to go. I don't want to say he's, like, more traditional, but you can tell what his kind of, like, ideal relationship situation is, especially after all these years, is that Dominique is kind of there to support him while he does his thing. He works as a mechanic, so his life is often very much separate from Dominique's in the modeling world. But what this turns into and what is presented as is more of Al being a limiter on Dominique and her potential career success and opportunities. For the other 3 cast members, we get to focus a bit more on their modeling work. Cece meets up with Isis to do damage control after the incident between Cassandra and Claudia, and we learn that Ren got the modeling gig over Aris from that previous episode, who decided to go meet with the plastic surgeon to see what rhinoplasty could result in for her. We also follow Isis, Aris, and Ren to a go-see for Richie Rich, which both Aris and Ren land, the news awkwardly being delivered while Isis was around, giving Isis more uncertainty about her decision to make the big move out to LA. Isis gets to hang out with her fellow ANTM gals Lisa D'Amato and Naima Mora, who offer her support in this Slay adventure. I had a little freak-out fan moment. I was watching this with my roommates, and Naima and Lisa showed up, and I was like, oh my god, that's Naima and Lisa. And I was having to explain, like, they're from America's Next Top Model. They're winners, like, all this stuff. And my roommates are kind of like, okay, sure. I thought it was cool that they got to make sort of this cameo appearance in support for Isis. Especially doubly interesting to kind of, like, include them in the show as part of Isis's story and support. I guess, you know, you don't want to leave a cast member out when they have something like this, and it can be helpful, and also provide a bit of a, like, context and sort of a bit of a reputation boost. It's like, oh, we've got Lisa and Naima on this show. Technically, they are here. They agreed to be on camera for us. It's nice to see them, though. In episode 3, the relationships plots continue, and they will for the rest of the show, as Aris and Laith end up going on a little hangout after doing a shoot together. Aris takes this hangout as a date, while Laith is unsure of what to make of all that. Aris really has decided she wants Laith, and she tells us that she's going to get what she wants. And she's also kind of shown us in the past, although not really. We get major Ren development in this episode as well, in particular relating to her relationship with her dad. While out with Cassandra, Ren gets a call from her dad, and Cassandra notices that Ren lowers her voice when talking with him. Cassandra pushes Ren about why she does this, and Ren reveals that she just wants to keep things as normal as possible between her and her dad. Later, Ren talks briefly with Laith about relationships with parents, and then at a photo shoot Ren is doing, her dad comes to watch her do her work. This is a very tense moment and scene at first, but then after Cece talks to both Ren and her dad, the two talk to each other and come to a good understanding of each other and Ren's new life experiences. In episode 4, the entire LA gang goes to NYC to introduce the sleigh models to the New York market by participating in a show for Hood by Air, which we're told has recently done work with Drake and Kanye. Love some timely celebrity references that won't age poorly. We learned that Aris worked in New York for 3 years and hated it the whole time because of the competition and the vibe of the modeling scene there. Ren attempts to meet up with an ex of hers, which surprises Aris and Laith because Ren doesn't hold on to anything from her past. The two of them decide to follow Ren to her hangout, but Ren's friend doesn't make it due to needing to be in the hospital for anorexia. And Aris opens up to Laith and Ren about her own experience with eating disorders. Cece, Cassandra, and Dominique scout out some new models while in New York and end up selecting a trans man, Liam, to see about working with and having him join the agency. I'm just going to say this is a very fun, silly moment for me in the show because Liam is from Des Moines, and it turns out that Cassandra is also from Des Moines, and I am not from Des Moines, but I went to school in Iowa, just outside of Des Moines, so I know a lot about Des Moines. And they started sharing like the high schools they went to, and I'm like, I know where these schools are. I have friends who went to those schools. I have friends who work at those schools. I was like, this is weird, but also kind of cute. It was a cute moment. Dominique, back in New York City, gets to see her husband Al after 2 weeks living and working in LA. He still doesn't like that she's gone, and she's trying to get it through to him that she's not just going to be a housewife. She has a career that she wants to launch, and this is how it's going to happen. And he needs to support her in that. Halfway through this episode, the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting occurs. The cast members wake up in NYC to news reports of the attack, and they come together to support each other, talk about what this means for them. Aris and Cassandra talk about not giving in and not being afraid. Isis and Laith express some concerns about fears of future attacks, and Dominique ends up taking it the hardest. Ren is kind of quiet, but Dominique takes it the most to heart to herself. She begins to shut herself in and not want to go out and separate herself from everyone but Al. She explains to us in some confessionals that whenever stuff like this happens, she ends up with some extreme agoraphobia. She actually harkens it back to when she was living in New York during the 9/11 attacks and how that made her feel afraid to go outside, to go anywhere, to do anything, and this is kind of pushing her in that same direction. In a completely different twist of vibe, there's an after party following the Hood by Air gig, and the gang get Dominique to come out because they're worried about her and they're wanting her to do things with her to kind of keep her out of her head and out of this anxiety that she's now spiraling into. But she only comes out on the stipulation that Al comes with her to be there for support. He does come, he arrives, but he's wasted. And this leads to a fight between him and Dominique about him making it difficult for Dominique to grow her career. And finally, near the end of the episode, Aris and Laith are confronted by Cece, as it turns out there was some tabloid articles about them being spotted together out at the club and being very close up on each other. Episode 5 has a large focus on a go-see opportunity for the magazine Spiegel, which, crucify me for my lack of fashion knowledge here, unfortunately. I'm not the expert on it as much as I'd like to be. Spiegel's a big catalog. And they make a really big deal of it throughout the episode. Aris, Ren, Isis, and Dominique all audition in the go-see for the role of Spiegel's new cover model, the first transgender one at that. The casting interview is fairly intense, and we get to watch the four of them answer the various questions thrown at them. Ultimately, Ren does get the Spiegel gig, much to Arise's disappointment. Arise, however, has an audition for a TV hosting gig organized by Cece for Obsev. She's excited for this opportunity. She'd like to get into hosting, but her lack of experience in TV, particularly teleprompter reading, makes the audition a rough time. And the woman she's auditioning for tells her that she kind of just needs to practice some more. Arise and Laith are also officially dating as of this episode, albeit long distance. They have a cute dynamic, almost an opposites attract kind of vibe. We get to sit in on some of their long distance FaceTimes and whatnot. Continuing with relationships, Dominique, Arise, and Isis talk about those relationships a little bit in this episode. And they kind of realize together it's well, Arise has Laith, Dominique has Al, what does Isis have? So Dominique ends up setting Isis up on a blind date, much to Isis's protest. This date goes poorly, not only because Isis and this random guy don't really have much in common, it could have gone okay for that, but also because Dominique and everyone else is at the same bar to kind of support Isis on this date, and Dominique is gone. She is wasted as a way of coping with the stress and the frustration that Al has been putting her through. Dominique has some time with the group later in which she apologizes for her behavior, but she also tells everyone that she really needs to go back to New York and she needs to get this all figured out. Laith also finally gets to have a really incredible moment in this episode, as during a scene with his mom, she reveals that she showed a picture of Laith to someone at her church, and when asked about it, she said that yes, this is her son, Laith. He is a model. And it's great, it's beautiful, we love the progress she's making. I couldn't figure out the filming time frame for this show, but if you remember, episode 1 was the one where she was like, I don't even want to try to call you he, or to call you son. She's extremely resistant. And only 4 episodes later, she's made this breakthrough. So who knows exactly what happened or what the time frame was. We know it was at least summertime because of the events of Pulse in the previous episode, but I couldn't figure out how much time had elapsed between a lot of these different scenes. And who's to say, of course, again, reality TV, that all of the scenes within one episode happen within the relative same time as each other. They could have taken things from all over the place and stitched it together just because it made the best storyline for that episode or overall. Either way, episode 6 is our last episode. This one has 3 big events. There's the Spiegel catalog shoot, which Ren landed, but her inexperience is very apparent, and the shoot does not go well. She can't take a good direction from the photographer or the director. She's just not giving them what they want, and they keep going forward. Eventually, the director calls Cece to have to be like, hey, Ren's not working out. What am I going to do? Do I cut the losses and just abandon the whole day, even though I paid for this physical shooting space? Or do you have someone around that you could swap in? And luckily, Arise is around. So Arise ends up stepping in for Ren to deliver the shoot, making Arise the first trans model to appear on the cover of Spiegel. Ren also struggles with a little bit of a PR disaster in this final episode when she and Cece have to talk about old explicit videos of Ren existing online. The second event is New York Fashion Week. Arise and Laith already have spots in a show, and Laith wants his mom to come watch him do his thing. Arise also gives Laith an ultimatum as part of their storyline: either move to LA or the relationship ends, because she doesn't do long distance. At first it appears that Laith's mom doesn't show up, and Arise is trying to give Laith this kind of thing of if she's here, she's acting out of love, and if she doesn't show up, she's acting out of fear, which of course puts a little bit of anxiety in Laith. But Laith rocks it at the show, so does Arise. And it turns out Laith's mom did show up. She was actually even front row, and she's super proud of her son. She also gets to officially meet Arise after the show, and yes, Laith does make a commitment by the end to move to LA. Isis, after a season of bad luck and no landed opportunities through Slay, finally lands a spot in New York Fashion Week with Michael Costello, which Cece did arrange for her, so he finally delivered for Isis. The final big event of the episode and the season is a big wedding ceremony for Dominique, planned as a surprise by Al. They've been together, but they've never had a ring, nor did a formal ceremony, just eloped, did the courthouse thing. Cece and Cassandra managed to help Al out and pulled together a little beach ceremony under the guise of Dominique landing a gig for a bridal commercial. And the series gets to end on the joy of a wedding ceremony with all in attendance. Cece also offers Dominique the opportunity to stay in New York City by starting up a Slay model management location there. Which I will say, Slay opened in 2016, so this is like very big aspirational goals for Cece to be like, we just opened, how about we do a second location? Shoot for the moon, you'll only land among the stars. So now I want to get into our cast members and talk about their stories and investigate them just a little bit. Let's start with Ren. She's the very first one we meet, and our first impression of her that she's perhaps a little aimless at this point in life. We learn much later on that she was the one Cece selected to join Slay out of almost 500 applicants, but from Ren's behavior, it seems like she's still not very sure about the whole modeling thing. Cassandra attempts to take Ren under her wing and shape her into a professional model, but Ren has strong personality and resolve to really remain herself. And in a way, this also extends to her experience being transgender. Earlier in life, Ren was homeless and lived with her dad in their car for a few years. After coming out, what we are shown in her scenes, learn from her words, and observe in her behaviors is that she's the kind of person who really wants to just be able to keep everything in her life basically the same, but now she's a woman. Cassandra, in her attempts to craft a professional model, often takes Ren shopping, attempting to put her in very feminine clothing, which is just not Ren's style. As Reese puts it, Ren wants to stay comfortable in her comfortable life. This is definitely apparent when we observe her interactions with her father. Ren doesn't want to have these conversations with her dad. She doesn't want to have to face him seeing her in dresses and feminine outfits and in makeup. She wants to be able to do her thing and largely keep that separate from what her parents get to see. I think that's a very important experience to show. When you fill representative media with people who are mostly always out and proud, you can sometimes leave behind people who really need to see other people who struggle with that approach. I really like that Ren just wants to be Ren, and isn't really aiming to represent the transgender community, which actually also ends up being one of the reasons the Spiegel cover opportunity gets to her. Arise and Cece and Cassandra a little bit really put the weight on her that as being Spiegel's first trans cover model, she's doing a lot of representative work. And she tells us in confessional, she's like, I don't really want to do that. I don't really sign up for doing that, but I guess I have to. I also find Ren is a very interesting case study in ideas of femininity and rejections of them. Some might want to say that a trans woman should want to appear and behave as feminine as possible to pass, but Ren doesn't necessarily seem to be interested in that. She's, to use, gender stereotypes, she's more tomboyish, you could say. Her preferred outfit is like jeans and a shirt rather than a dress or a skirt or anything like that. Ren is also our most inexperienced model, and it's neat to see how Arise in particular deals with Ren landing jobs that Arise thought she had in the bag, simply due to her greater experience and skill. This happens, twice throughout the show? The very first Go See we watched them do, and then again with the Spiegel shoot. It's, to Arise you can imagine the frustration, the amount of work you've put in comes this new girl who doesn't even seem to really care about doing the work and doing the job, and she's getting all the jobs you want. You can imagine the frustration. There is one interesting moment later on in the season where this kind of gets flipped on its head, and it's really nice to see, and it kind of surprises the cast members. When Arise is trying to prepare to do this audition for the hosting gig, has to make an audition tape. So Cassandra is helping her record it and trying to help her through kind of like, okay, we need to do one solid take, you need to kind of learn the lines, we need to get better at like the diction and everything. And Ren is just sort of observing. Eventually Ren steps in because she actually has a theater background. And she gives Arise all of this advice and these tips on how to pose yourself, how to properly present yourself, how to speak, how to look at the camera when you're talking, all these things. And she really like steps in and again flips it on its head and kind of suddenly steps in as kind of this like, mentor role for Arise in this moment. And again, it surprises everyone because they're like, where's this Ren usually? How do we access this one more during her modeling work? And so it was very interesting in that moment to see this kind of flip. And you can kind of tell that it's like when Ren is interested or when she knows about something, she'll put the energy in. So it does make you question, is the modeling something she really does want to do? It's hard to tell. I'll say she's the only one that doesn't have like a Wikipedia link for like her own personal page. And it seems she has kind of stepped away from the modeling world from what I can tell. I didn't super duper investigate a lot of these cast members except for the well-known ones afterwards. So, speaking of Arise is driven, proud, and committed to doing her best and achieving her goals. She has plenty of experience working as a model, and she's very steadfast in her opinions of how she must move through the world as a transgender woman of color. She knows what she wants, and she's gonna do what it takes to get it, both modeling work and a man, in this case, Laith. Her plots are mostly connected to both Ren and Laith, actually serving as a contrast to both of them. She's a much more experienced model than Ren, and ends up losing jobs to her, including initially the monumental Spiegel cover and catalog job. And she's also much more sure of her romance goals than Laith is, in part because Laith is still discovering himself, while Arise is very confident and secure in who she is and where she's come from. Her inclusion in the show is also to largely serve as a mouthpiece for talking about the social and systemic challenges faced by transgender people of color, as evidenced by the multiple instances we observe of her talking about dominant white beauty standards, the hegemony of the modeling industry, and expectations of body type, and also the challenges of working in an industry that is centered around selling things. It's very interesting that the way Arise is presented is that we agree with her, like, she tells us she's experienced, she's explained all these things, she demonstrates her knowledge and understanding of the industry and the world, and so you're going, okay, give her the job, and then we watch her not get the jobs, and you're kind of like, it's a cognitive dissonance, so you're like, what is going on? What is happening here? And it does make you maybe question a little bit, like, well, what aren't we being shown that's not securing her these jobs? Or is there just like a shift in a particular things that she's doing the ghosties for, or auditioning for, where they prefer Ren or someone else? There was one job in the middle of the show that both her and Ren land. That's the one that they land instead of, and Isis doesn't, and there's that awkward moment. And they get to do that one like sort of together, which is nice. But it does make you question kind of like what gets left out, what is the reason here? At the beginning of the show, there's an attempt to have a conversation, or at least sort of some kind of discussion and bringing up the idea of dominant beauty standards, where Cece talks to Arise about how if she gets a nose job, that might open up more doors for her. Arise doesn't want to. She doesn't want to alter her natural beauty and state, but this could be the problem, you know? But that's kind of dropped and not really brought up for the rest of the show. It's really much like the first 2 episodes kind of thing, and it's never really addressed ever again. Maybe it just didn't go anywhere. Maybe the editors and producers didn't really get any good footage or interview stuff to use from Arise about that, or maybe it just never came up again. But it makes you like, when you sit there and you sit with it for a while, you're like, if Arise is the professional one, the more experienced one, why do we only get to see her have the 3 jobs throughout the show? And why is part of her plot lines that she's constantly losing these things to Ren, if not for reality TV conflict? Now on to Laith. Laith is our single trans man representation, at least until we get Liam a little bit later, and also serves as representation of a transgender person struggling with a family member who is unsupportive. At the start of the series, Laith's mom is absolutely not supportive. She even states that she doesn't want to try to use correct pronouns or call Laith her son. And this stems from her being involved with a Pentecostal church. By later on in the series, she makes amazing progress, especially once she gets to see Laith doing well as a model and how much he enjoys this line of work and how much it really helps him feel like his true self. We love that development. We also are part of Laith's exploration into romance and dating. He tells us in the past that he's been in relationships, but hasn't really pursued that since transitioning. So we tag along with him for some of these excursions and adventures in romance. We tag along with him on that one kind of bad date that his friend Giselle set up for him, and then for most of the season we also follow his and Arise's developing relationship. Dating can be a very tricky social ritual for trans people, as we saw in this show, but it seems Laith and Arise both enjoy that they are coming from a mutual understanding when they date each other. Altogether, Laith is also a very interesting look at ideas of masculinity within this show. If Ren is someone who is resisting dominant ideas of femininity, then Laith is someone who embraces dominant ideas of masculinity. Laith goes to the gym frequently, we follow him there multiple times, and he's protective of Arise once they start dating, a trait that is typically attributed to cis heteronormative men. Laith seems to lean more into the social expectations of men to help with his establishment as male, and to give him confidence and gender euphoria in his experience. I'm going to jump into Isis next. Isis, again, comes from America's Next Top Model, and her time on the show is definitely spent fighting that. Early on, Aris judges Isis for having this particular background, and it seems Isis is facing the same problems many other ANTM contestants do. The modeling world doesn't want to take them seriously because they came from a reality competition, and in this case, neither does Aris. However, Cece is taking a chance on her, and Isis is taking a chance on Slay and Cece. For most of the season, it really does seem like nothing is really going her way, from not landing modeling jobs to having misadventures and romance. She does eventually land the gig for the New York Fashion Week, allowing her to begin to establish herself as talented in modeling and separate herself from the ANTM past. Isis on this show is also interesting from the angle of transgender representation in the modeling industry. From her perspective, she is hesitant to join Slay because she's worried the only jobs she'll get are because she's with Slay and because she's trans. She wants to be able to have her skill set, her experience, and the career she will end up with to be separated from her existence as a transgender woman. And I definitely think this is important to include and also important to talk about because this is one of the points that's often made when it comes to how do we do proper representation and how do we do inclusivity right. Is it enough to include people from marginalized groups specifically because they're in marginalized groups, or is it better to treat them as we would everyone else and not highlight the fact that they are from a marginalized group? In some cases, there's an argument for treating those from a marginalized group differently on the basis of improving equity and access to the same things that people in the dominant class and group have access to innately as part of the societal structure. But, and this varies from person to person and group to group, some may just want to be treated the same way everyone else is, regardless of whether or not that introduces or exacerbates an inequity. Either way, I think Isis is a very interesting person to have in this show, as this is Slay, the modeling management company that works with trans models. Isis is a trans model, but Isis doesn't want to be seen as just a trans model. She wants to be seen as a model. I do have to wonder a little bit about Isis's inclusion and casting on the show. I would love to be able to speak to anyone who made this show or anyone who participated in it or the people who were at Slay at the time to try to figure out how this show was pulled together. Did they audition specific people who were at Slay already to be on the show? Was Isis scouted from America's Next Top Model and then brought into Slay as part of the show? And that's just not really explained because that's kind of setting things up, but it would make sense. They kind of pull shows like The Housewives together like that sometimes. Or is Isis, interested in continuing the reality TV thing? She found some success and some exposure on Next Top Model. Can she do another reality modeling experience and that give her even more exposure and help her launch her career? That could also backfire though. But it'd be interesting just to know how exactly these 5 cast members, and then Cece and Cassandra, became the main part of the show. Speaking of Cassandra, I do want to talk about her just a little bit because while she's not one of the models, she does play a large part in the show, as both Cece's assistant and as another transgender cast member. She serves in some part as a bit of a mentor to at least Ren, but also as someone who has a role in these models' work who herself is not constrained to the exact same set of social roles. Her role in the show is part narrator, part plot advancer, but also someone who shares in the transgender experience. She tends to push Ren's ideas of being a model and being a trans woman, but she also has moments with the rest of the cast, offering support and mentorship. I don't think the show would be complete without her. She has such a character and a spirit that she brings to the show that if you took her away, it wouldn't be as entertaining. She provides a lot of really good commentary in the confessionals, I'll say. Lastly, we have Dominique. Again, her arc in the show focuses on her facing new challenges, showing that even at an older age, anything can happen and a dream career can still be achieved. I say older just because most models enter the industry when they are pretty young, like young adult, 20s. That's just kind of an average. I don't have a source on that. It's just from what I've seen and kind of what I've gathered. I think this is important not only to show regarding the modeling world, but also as a successful and talented trans woman in the modeling world. Dominique is driven and she knows what she wants to do, and she's not going to let things get in her way to get it. This motivation came into conflict with her attachment to her husband, however. It is almost ironic, I'd say, in that showing a trans woman who has been in a happy marriage for so long is now being limited by that same marriage and romantic relationship. If the show really wanted to highlight the fact that, yes, trans people, despite being a marginalized population, have the potential to have careers that they want and have families and experience romance the same way everyone else does. But then the show seems to take that and be like, but actually for Dominique, it's this attachment and this pursuing the family that might be limiting her career. It's almost, you go a step back further, and it's interesting because it does then mimic storylines that we see in both unscripted and scripted media and all forms of media and just storytelling in general about women, where they kind of have to do this trade-off, like, do you become the career woman or do you become the family woman? And a lot of popular media posits that you can't do both simultaneously, especially not in our current capitalist system. I do think it's good, both for Dominique, but also for the show, that this conflict storyline around her marriage and Al and whether or not this marriage is a limit on her career and her opportunities is resolved by the end, at least in a kind of heartfelt way that makes you not think about it anymore. Because Al got to do this big, gesture, romantic moment. They had the wedding ceremony, which Dominique, they never had one. And they were able to put her, in a nice, beautiful bridal gown, get her all done up and everything. They did it on the beach with all the family and friends that were in LA, at least. And then Cece offered her the ability to start up a new sleigh model management location in New York City. But then the series ends. And it's like, well, so then what happens? Does that go through? What happens? What goes on next? I will say Dominique and Al separated in 2018, 2 years after the show aired and filmed. So I guess eventually the relationship did end so that she could keep doing on her career, because then again, she went on to be in Pose and Legendary and has done many modeling and advocacy and media and career stuff. So make of that what you will. Dominique in the show also gets space to serve as a mentor to the others in the show, not only in modeling but also in life. She helps Laith with both modeling and romance. She offers advice to Ren. She offers advice to Isis. She and Cassandra kind of confide in each other every now and then, and she even offers some support to Cece when he selects her to be the new sort of modeling coach for LA Slay Model Management, and then kind of picks her to see about opening up New York City Slay Model Management. She is a very grounded person and character in the show, especially compared to the different personalities that we are seeing on display. And so it does rock us quite a bit when she is shaken by Pulse, and then she's also shaken by Al and his behaviors. And I think that is actually done really well in the show. Kudos to the editors and the producers on that one. I do wish we could have seen her do more modeling. I understand that, again, Cece picked her to be the modeling coach, so that would take her away from modeling gigs themselves. But we got some really fast footage of her doing some go-sees, some auditions. It would have been nice to be able to see her do her modeling job in the show as well. And that kind of goes for everyone. And I'm going to get into that soon, actually. I think overall I rate the show as a 6 out of 10. It wasn't bad by any means, but I find the events chosen to focus on to be a little interesting, but also I wanted more. For a show about models, it feels like we spent more time with their personal challenges and events rather than spending a significant amount of time with the modeling industry, which is fine. To the show's credit, each episode does show either a single modeling gig, a go-see, or both. However, I found myself just wanting more when it came to these models interacting with the industry as a whole. Why is it important that Slay Model Management exists? They work with trans models, but the show doesn't do a lot in showing us why that's needed. Rather, the show only alludes to the importance of having this agency through remarks made by the cast. The best looks we got into the industry and what the job is like were with the go-see that Ren and Arise had in episode 1, where Ren got humbled for being unprofessional and not up to standard, and then the Spiegel shoot in the last episode, where the director from Spiegel really did a good job of showing how cutthroat the work can be, when he was kind of telling Ren, hey, listen, you're not making it happen. We gotta figure out what we're gonna do. I want to revisit the quote from Whoopi Goldberg again. She said, "The models are struggling with things we can all relate to, trying to make ends meet, fighting to make a name for themselves, and navigating the minefields of personal relationships. All of these struggles are amplified by the fact that they are also fighting to break down barriers and taking on the responsibility of representing the transgender community in today's society. Having watched the show, this quote has an interesting relationship to the final product. These models are indeed breaking down barriers and representing the transgender community not only in their modeling but also now on television. But not everyone wants to be a part of that. For example, Ren has some apprehension about being a figurehead of representation during the Spiegel photo shoot and being the catalog's first trans cover model. She just wants to chill. As Reese put it, I love it. Ren just wants to be comfortable with her comfortable life. Isis also makes it clear on multiple instances that for her, she's a model who happens to be trans. Dominique also made kind of similar comments in some confessionals in like the intro opening episode. This contrasts sharply with Aris, who is unabashedly a trans model. There's layers and there's nuances to the way these people interact with ideas of identity, and in particular how they intersect their identity as transgender with their professional identities. And while I think it's neat that the show has this coverage of ways to intersect these perspectives, it doesn't do as much as it could with it, at least I think. If part of the goal of this show is to advance trans media representation, as Slay does for modeling, then I'm actually not too sure it properly achieved that. We got a good amount of explanation why representation is important through confessionals, but I think it would have been a stronger message to have some examples. Obviously, we don't want to capitulate to transphobia and show that happening just for the sake of making audiences aware such a thing exists, especially when the cast members have to deal with it on a daily basis. All of that said, it was still pretty good. And I do just want to address one more thing about the content of the show. I will say, I think including the discussion about the Pulse attack, especially since it happened during filming, was a correct and important way to go about navigating around that event. The cast members' various responses to learning about the attack in the event showed the multiple ways how marginalized people react to violence. Some become more resistant while others become cautious. It also, I think, helped to break the show out of the kind of Truman Show-esque vibe that a lot of reality shows can fall into, especially ones in the most recent decade or so that are very heavily like producer designed, and especially for docuseries, they make it look like things kind of happen naturally, but all the meetings, a lot of the events, those are set up by production, especially when it's multiple people. Here, we do get them. They all work for the same modeling agency, and so a lot of the events that they're coming to together are organized by that, or at least in that context. But like a hangout could be like produced. I think having the Pulse shooting in the show, talking about it, referencing it, seeing and watching the cast members deal with it in their own ways, really helped to ground the show a bit more in reality, like actual reality. So, one of the big questions, was the show entertaining? I think yes. I enjoyed watching it, and each episode made me want to continue watching to see what happens next. Definitely has the vibes of a mid-2010s docuseries. I'll put it on my recommendations list for people who are interested in docuseries or reality TV, or people interested in relatively unknown queer media. I'm not sure it has quite the staying or the star power to pull people in who necessarily aren't interested in the reality TV genre, but it was still good. What would I have done, or what would I have liked to see to make the show better? I honestly just think more time watching the models experience the modeling world would make the show immensely more interesting. The people were interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it. But I wanted to see more modeling. That's just me. If they're models and they're working, why can't we see them doing more modeling? Make the show a little bit longer. Get more than 6 episodes. Give it like at least 8, 10 maybe. But I have no power over that. Anyway, this was the recap episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode on Strut. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving the show a follow on your preferred podcasting platform. Like, rate, and review the show. Share the episode or the show with a friend, or check out some of my other episodes. You can also follow the pod on social media on Instagram and TikTok at The Recap Episode. On both of those platforms, I'm doing a Pride series all month long where I'm highlighting and spotlighting queer and LGBTQ plus focused reality TV shows as a little bit of TV media reality queer history. Other than that, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, happy Pride Month!